Hi and welcome. I'm in Blender and I'm going to take a look at my process for rendering out an animation from Blender. So here's this animation right here, just this logo that I've built and built this wall, background, all of it. Then there's just 3 camera moves in there. So I'm going to render that out. So I'm going to stop that. And first of all, let's take a look at our render engine. And for this one, I'm going to render out. So this tab right here, if that's not open, click on it. And we're going to go to render engine. Oftentimes, Blender will default to Eevee, and I am changing it to cycles. If you have the ability, you can select from CPU to GPU compute. We need to take a look at the sampling, not for the viewport. The sampling for the viewport is what we see right here. And I'll go ahead and click on the rendered shading for the viewport. And so these settings right here pertain to what we see in the viewport. For the actual render, we want to take a look at these settings. And for this one, I've dropped the max samples down to 1024. Usually it will default at 4096. And so I've dropped that way down, and denoise is normally selected anyway. The next tab that we need to look at is our output tab. And from here, you'll make a few decisions. So the resolution that I'm going to output this video at is 1920 by 1080. That's just a normal HD default resolution. 24 frames per second, and that's what the timeline is set for, is 24 frames per second. So there's 240 frames. That's 10 seconds right there. So this timeline is just a little bit longer than 10 seconds long. You can see here that we can choose the range of frames that we want to render. And right now, this one is selected for 1 through 250. And then down below that, I'm going to render this out as a PNG image sequence. And I'll jump into what an image sequence is a little bit more in just a moment. But what we need to do is decide on where we want these files to end up when they're rendered. And I'm going to make a new folder here. And so I will select new folder, and that is where these files will end up. So I'm going to hit accept there. And so as a PNG image sequence, that means that each frame of the video will be rendered out as one PNG. They'll all be sequentially numbered based on the frame that is being rendered. And so when this is done, we will have 250 PNG images. Now we'll need to pull all of those together, and we'll use After Effects to do that. So I have everything selected. Again, with that, we'll just jump up here to our render drop-down menu, click on that, and we'll go to render animation. And so based on all of the different factors in your animation, your lighting, what type of materials you're using, the resolution, all of that's going to factor into how long it's going to take for this to render. Some pieces will render quickly. Some are going to take hours to render. So you'll get a readout up here of a few things. So the time right there is how long has it taken already for this frame to render. What it's anticipating right there on how much longer it's going to take. Now that will speed up, and you can watch those numbers. You can see that that's not necessarily real time. So that's not a great indicator, but it does give you some information. And then the main thing to kind of look at is what sample are you on for that one image. And so you can see that as it renders through more samples, that we get a cleaner look. And then once it's finally done, it will jump to the next frame. And you can see right there, we're on frame 1. So you can always come back to this and get an indication of where you are in the render. So it just rendered the first frame, and I've already rendered this out. So I'm going to jump to the finished render and show you what I do after this point. So I'm just going to close this out. And anytime that you need to close out a render, you can just come up here and click on the X, close that out. So I'm done rendering in Blender, and I've opened up the folder where all of the PNGs are just to show you. Double click on one of them, and there is that first frame. So each one of these here is an image or one frame of that video. So you see 1 through 250. Now I'm going to import all of those into After Effects. After Effects, Premiere Pro, any type of either compositing or editing software should be able to import an image sequence. To do that, I'm just going to double click right here in the project panel of After Effects. It's going to bring up my render options. My folder is open to where that render is. I'm going to select the very first PNG of that image sequence. You'll see that After Effects recognizes this as being a PNG sequence, and that's why it has that box checked right there. And so I can go ahead and import all of these. I don't need to import these separately. I just need to click on the first one, make sure that it sees it as a PNG or JPEG or bitmap, whichever type of file you choose to use, and then hit import. So one little gotcha that you have to be aware of is I rendered that out of Blender at 24 frames per second, but After Effects is interpreting it as 30 frames per second because there's no metadata that follows this file to tell it that it's 24 frames per second. We'll need to tell After Effects that we want it to run at 24 frames per second. For After Effects and Premiere, the way that you can do that is to right-click on the clip itself, go to Interpret Footage, Main, and then right in this dialog box, you'll see Assume this frame rate. I'm going to set that to 24 frames per second, and then I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm just going to drop this into a composition, and I usually like to go to Media Encoder from this point to render this out. So we'll take just a moment to let Media Encoder open up. So Media Encoder has opened up and loaded that composition. And I'm going to go with these settings right here. H.265 match source high bit rate. And then I just need to navigate to, and I'm going to drop this on my desktop real quick and let After Effects finish this up. So when that is done rendering, I can click on this link here. It'll open up Explorer to that file, and I can take a look at the finished video. Here it is right here. One of the benefits of rendering out an image sequence is that if you see something in the finished animation that you want to fix, and maybe it does not occur during the entire time of the animation, you can go back into your original animation, fix that. And so in Blender, if there was something that in my timeline I wanted to fix, and let's just say from frame 80 to frame 120 was where the issue was, what I could do as far as an image sequence is rather than rendering all of that out again, I could come in here to the range and I could set that up to render frame 80 to 120, render out just those 40 frames, and then replace that in my image sequence. I would still need to go back into After Effects and render out from there, but that means then I don't have to render out the entire composition. I can just render out the frames that I needed. Another benefit is that I've had in past renders an issue where either the software shuts down or the computer shuts down. It might have been because of lost power or some reason like that. And let's say that we got through a certain number of frames. And again, that's the benefit where I can just pick up on the frame that it last rendered, start from there and continue rendering out. That way I'm not having to render out the entire timeline again. I hope this tutorial has been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know down below.